Welcome everybody to another Outcast Haven Deck Tech. We are going to start doing these more regularly. I hope you joined us for our last one, Wizard. It was just a wash cycle. That's why me and Blake are wearing the same things. Probably did not happen immediately afterwards. You know, these are different days. Just new wash cycle. So we appreciate you coming back. Today, we are going to move into another non-meta style deck, and that is Azalea. And this is what we would call, I don't know, super aggro Azalea. This is not just a regular Azalea. This is, we'll put a brick on the gas pedal and I'll try to stop, but we're just going to go.
Yeah, I take great pride in the fact that we actually kind of laugh every time I count the red count in this deck. And we'll get to that in a second after we talk about the loadout. But the red count in this deck is borderline insane. Like it's kind of absurd what the red, yellow, blue counts is. And I actually am really proud of that. Not in the sense that I just do it because I think it's hilarious, but because it makes the deck function the way that I want the deck to function. So.
Right. And that's probably why Wizard's probably the hardest matchup, just because of the red.
Yeah. It's funny because, right, like a lot of decks have plenty of pitch value for Wizard. I do not. I have a lot of issues with Wizard because I could put 4 null rune objects on and I would still be screwed because like it would take all 4 cards a lot of times.
Your whole hand is gone.
Just to do 4 barrier.
That's great.
It's great. So we'll get it. So basically the hero is Azalea. She's got her normal thing. I run the Death Dealer. I know some people like the new bow. I like the Death Dealer because basically you're going to, more often than not, you're going to need a resource to pitch anyway. And sometimes you can do a lot if you just have 2 cards in hand and you need to just drop an arrow. If you have 2 arrows in hand, sometimes it's nice to drop an arrow to pay for the Death Dealer to put an arrow in, because in this build you'll see that I go for big swings. I know some people like wide ranger. I like tall ranger because I think the impact of the arrows is what I'm going for, and it's honestly tough to get multiple arrows in without having a bunch of these reload tricks and stuff, and I don't want to rely on pulling reload cards in order to get my arrows back in. I just want to put 1 arrow in and then I want to stack a ton of effects on it, and I want to just make sure that arrow drives home. So we run the Skullbone Cross Wrap because it's good. We run the Bullseye Bracers because it helps the game plan. I run the Tunic because, like I said, I run a lot of red, so I really need that resource a lot of times. And it'll pay for Death Dealer sometimes, which is great. It lets me keep 2 cards in hand.
I think that's one of the best combos of Ranger is when you Tunic into a Death Dealer, you just gained a hand. So if you get any go-agains or that's where it seems like your huge combo comes, and that's every three attacks, which is pretty good.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I run Snapdragon Scalers because if I do draw into something and I can drop another arrow and I have a reload or something like a take aim, I can fire off a couple arrows, and I'll have turns where I will go maybe a little wider and I'll fire 2. Sometimes if you get really crazy lucky, you can Bullseye Bracers into another one, and you can have like a crazy turn where you stack a ton of actions and it gets wild. But the one thing that definitely is detrimental to my game plan is the fact that if you notice, Skullbone and Tunic are the only things with block value, and I absolutely unequivocally do not want to block with them basically the whole game. So I effectively have 0 armor block. So I'm hoping that they give Ranger like an arms or a legs that have some that is valuable to the deck. Yeah.
It's actually kind of mean what they did to Ranger with no block. I mean, you look at some of the other decks with their 2, and I mean, even if you would have given Skullbone something other than Blade Break, that's just horrible. You can't even get 1 block with it.
Yeah, I have to save it. It's my opt, which really sets up my Azalea turn. So, and then I run a couple pieces of null rune just as arms and legs if I really need it. But I actually realized that I have the arms in there. I don't know why I have the no rune gloves, because the Bullseye Bracers have it. It's just if I need it permanently for the full game. So that's kind of the only reason it's in there. So we'll go down and we'll talk about the most absurd thing in the deck is we'll get to this pitch value, which I actually had to send Jason. I sent Jason the link so we could talk about this. One of one of the things that makes this deck absurd is the fact that I run 53 red pitch, or I have 53 one pitch cards in the deck. So I lean heavy on the red because I lean heavy on maximum damage. And it can be detrimental sometimes, like in a wizard, but for the most part it's really effective. I'm trying to win fast is what my goal is with this deck, is I'm trying to churn through my deck and really go. So it does what it needs to do, which is just unload maximum damage whenever possible.
And you're going into that even a little further with your pitch costs. Two numbers that I'm looking at is average cost for your deck is 0.48. So your average cost is less than 1, and your average pitch is 1.4. So you're actually resource rich if you look at it based off the numbers.
In terms of the numbers of what I'm trying to spend versus what I have to spend, I usually have enough. My only issues come obviously when I have less. If I have one card in hand, I'm basically screwed unless I'm lucky and I get an arrow in hand, or I have an arrow in arsenal and a card to pay for it. But you will notice that like I run, like arrows in general are all zeros and ones, so that's not an issue. I run a lot of red. Red in the ledger is too good not to. I run I run all of the endless arrows. I do run take cover, because sometimes I need to set up a reload. And if I have an arrow in hand and an arrow in arsenal, I can use take cover basically to like put in my arsenal at the end of my next turn to set up my next turn after that with another arrow. So it facilitates some of the reloading of my arsenal. Take aim is so good, but I run just red and yellow. I don't run the blue because the +1 isn't valuable. And like I said, I'm going for tall attack, so getting a card in arsenal isn't hard. So I don't need the blue pitch value for the extra reload, which I think is valuable because just buffing an arrow by 1 isn't, when you're running a lot of reds like I am, it's not really that good. It doesn't really, turning it from a 5 to a 6, there's really no difference between a 5 attack and a 6 attack against most decks. Most people have 3 blocks, so it's not an issue. Hamstring shot is good because it's again, it's matchup dependent, but it's a 1 cost arrow that does 5 damage. Again, I just run the red in that. Ridge Rider shot is one of the few cards that I run in another color because the blue is only 2, but the value of dropping it in face up and getting an opt is huge, because what I'm able to do is drop it into my arsenal face up, opt the top card. If it's not an arrow, I can bottom that card, and sometimes I can just blind Azalea, and I'll just pray that I get lucky and hit something off the top of my deck. Blinding Azalea is not always the best strategy, but it's something that I will definitely do if I feel like I need to catch up really bad, or if I'm way ahead and I just want to try and just outright finish the game or get so far ahead that there's no catch up. I will sometimes do that. And then the red Ridge Rider shot is just good because any red arrow is basically in this deck. If it's red, I threw it in this deck because I want maximum damage. Sick'em shot is great because of the go again. Plunder run is something that you can kind of play some games with, this, which is really, really cool. One really good play that I like to run with Plunder run is if you draw into a Plunder run and a take aim in the same hand, is that you're able to take aim, the Plunder run, then play the Plunder run, and then Death Dealer to get your arrow in arsenal. So you're basically manipulating your turn to be massive damage and get a card draw to arsenal.
I was just going to ask that because that seems like a good combo, because a lot of the reloads, you can put cards that are not arrows. Some of them specify arrow, I believe, that you have to put an arrow in. But
yes, some
being able to, I mean, you get a red take aiming into a Plunder run, you're doing 6 damage with no cost associated. You hit an endless arrow, it goes back in your hand. If you have another go again, or you pop your scalers at that, I mean. And then the other thing I wanted to hit on is red in the ledger. Red in the ledger, that one action is so strong against so many meta decks. It's ridiculous. I mean, Ninja, it can shut down. Dorinthia can shut down. Wizard, you can't do your instance on your next turn because those are considered an action, so it shuts that down. That's such a good card. And if you, I mean, you could take aim and do a Plunder, which you've done to me, for an 11 damage. You're not blocking it. You're just not going.
Yeah, I think the value of the arrows and the reason that I like to go tall is because if I go 4 or 5 on something, right, then you can block with a couple cards or block with some of your equipment and a card, and I'm forced to have a razor reflex. Whereas I know there's some value, like I play warrior, so I obviously know the value of the reprise, right? I know the value of reactions and things, but there's something also about just like putting a 12 on the table and saying, what are you going to do now? Because so many of the cards have such strong effects that what it effectively does is says, if you don't block this whole thing, you're basically going to lose your next turn anyway. So do you want to not have the damage push through and have the effect take hold and lose your hand? Or do you want your hand? Like, those are your options. But if you keep your hand, you're going to just get chewed through with damage. So Azalea is kind of like a game where I'm going to put my cards on the table and I'm just going to see if you're willing to like make a big play out of it.
But then if you go into a Ridge Rider, which is only a 3, but that's 9, at least you can opt now, and you might be able to opt into a Red in the Ledger to do your dominate shot where it doesn't matter what they have. They just can't block it.
Yeah, you're just pushing big damage. And that's also why, like, I run Ravenous Rabble, but I only run the red because I run such a red heavy deck. It's really uncommon that I pull anything but a red. And a lot of times, like, Ravenous Rabble paired with like a Fate Foreseen, or with the Skullbone, you can opt a card. So if I have Ravenous Rabble in my hand and I know the next card is a red, before I do anything with that red arrow and swap it into my arsenal for the dominate, I'll go ahead and just throw the Ravenous. I'll flip that red. I'll show you. I'll say, hey, here's 4 with go again. What are you going to do with that? And now you see the card in my arsenal. You know it's on top. You know it's in my arsenal. You know a dominate arrow is coming. The question is, am I also holding a Nimblism? Am I going to Nimblism into like a 7 with dominate now? So it kind of dares you constantly to say, like, you know what? I'm not going to block, and I'm going to try and have a good turn anyway, because the arrows do have really, really strong effects on them.
I think that's what makes Ranger viable going forward is the effects are amazing.
Yeah, the effects are awesome. And like, I run a few defense reactions. Fate Foreseen is a defense reaction I run. Again, I run it in red because I'm a madman and I want just red. It's mainly because of the 4 block. Like, the one thing that is a huge adjustment mentally for me coming from warrior into ranger is the fact that when I play warrior, I get all 3 blocks all the time. I do my math off of 3 block math because every warrior card blocks for 3. I feel like with ranger, they were just like, you know what? Let's make life miserable on them. Like, we're not going to give them any armor that blocks. Like, no equipment for them to block. Also, tons of their cards are going to have 2 blocks. And then I choose to go red, so like Ravenous Rabble and Plunder runs have 2 blocks. So I have no block value. So running red Fate Foreseen lets me opt 1 to potentially set up a dominate arrow, and also has a 4 block, which is really, really important for me because sometimes I just need to be able to like not die on a turn. So it kind of bails me out at times.
I think a new player coming into this game, one of the biggest things that we did not consider when deck building is the 3 block versus the 2 block. You don't realize how important that is until you get replies for 1+1 on a damn Dorinthia because you only blocked with 2 cards and you're blocking for 5 instead of 6, and now they got a +4 counter and your life is over.
Yeah, you're basically just dead. And again, like I punish myself a little bit because I do choose to do a lot of like the reds and yellows, but that's the trade-off I'm making because I'm trying to play faster and I'm trying to go tall. Pathing Helix is a card that's like, it's in the deck because it's a 0, and against some matchups, I know I need to be more like pitch efficient as far as being able to play some cheap arrows because I'm going to have to throw more cards out. Ninja's a matchup where I definitely like have to balance like being able to block here and there. And sometimes I go down a couple cards in hand. So I'll go in with only 2 cards. So I know I need some free cards to be able to play. So Pathing Helix often comes in that matchup. It comes in against Wizard too, because sometimes I have to pitch 3 cards just to not take 3 damage on like a Sonic Boom. I need to keep Sonic Boom minimized. So I'll pitch 3 cards and I'm knowing that I have a Helix in my arsenal. I can at least throw an arrow back. So there's some value in that. I think the heart and soul of this deck is definitely the buff cards. 3 red come to fights, 3 red Nimblisms, 3 increase the tensions in red. 3, and then for reactions, 3 razor red reflex in red, and then 3 razor reflex in yellow. That stuff, basically, I'm just trying to maximize my buffs. I want to make sure that if somebody only blocks if they only have 2s in hand other than maybe 1-3, like if they have a bad hand and they're stuck with like one card that doesn't block, 2 2s and a 3, I want it to cost them their whole hand. I want them to have to sacrifice everything to block or to just be able to push it through. Again, come to fight is good, nimblism is good, increased attention is good because it lets you know it's coming. Like it tells you, hey, here comes 11 a lot of times. Like nimblism come to fight into an arrow for 5 is 11. It's like that's a really big number that people oftentimes, especially early game, like people don't just want to eat 11 and be down. If you just eat 11 turn 1 from me, like do the math, it's 40 to 29. You are significantly disadvantaged for the rest of the game because you're playing from behind. And then you have to add on to that what the arrow is going to do in terms of how it affects you.
Yeah, there's some negative impact there with what arrow hits you. And I know also that you'll sometimes save those for end game as well.
Yeah, so my favorite card to pitch early with the arrows is Remorseless. I usually try to bury Remorseless every time I see it early game because Remorseless is a card that paired with stuff like Come to Fight and Nimblism is just an absolute game ender, because if somebody chooses to go to single digits against a Remorseless, it's so tough because now every time you take an action, you're just like you're creeping closer and closer and closer and closer to death, and you're just screwed. Like your game is going to end so much faster. So like Remorseless is bad early because people will oftentimes sacrifice, and sometimes I suppose maybe I could play it better and just give them a Remorseless early because hey, every time you take an action, it costs you a life. But the reality is like early on, it's too easy to just give up 2 or 3 life, whereas later game, if you've got 7 life left and you get hit with a Remorseless and even one of that squeaks through, it's basically spells doom, right? Because now it's like if you do 3 actions, you just took half your life.
Well, that and the fact that you pair that with increase the attention, they just can't play defense reactions. So if they were saving a big unmovable or something like that in the arsenal or hand for that matter, you just can't play it. So I mean, and you have done the increased attentions into the Remorseless with the Dominate. So I will block 3 and die.
Yeah, I know. I actually, it's funny because I played a game against Toby, and I know Toby was like, he took a Remorseless and he took the brunt of most of it. And he's like, this next turn's going to hurt. And he chewed through like 4 of his own life. And he's like, I had no choice. I had to try and push damage back. And I think that's where, I know one of the things that Dane always loves to point out is that every other class has some sort of stipulation, like this card has to do X amount of damage in order to trigger an effect, like crush effects. And Azalea basically says, hey, guess what? I'm going to throw 11, and if you let even one of it through, you're going to get punished with the effect. So why not just let 4 of it through? Like, you just save your hand and do something next turn. So it's
you
kind
either
of
block it all
sense.
or let it all through.
Yeah, like you just try to clap back. And I kind of hope sometimes, like I like when people are just like, you know what? I'm taking 8. I'm like, fantastic. Let's go. That's what I want because I'm going to do it again next turn. Like I'm going to come. Now, to be fair, I will often eat a lot of that damage right back. Like I'll trade that damage where I'll give them 8 and then I'll take 6 because my mentality is like, I want to go fast. Every turn's coming at 11 for me if I can do it right. Whereas like most people, like they need to combo into an 11, but this deck is built to just push 11s. And that's like the whole, like the whole point.
It can hit double digits very fast, and it's very scary when it starts going off.
So Sleep Dart is my absolute favorite thing that they gave us in Crucible. It is so good into so many decks because against so into Brute, it kills their hero's Intimidate ability. Against
which
Bravo,
is huge.
Yeah. Against Bravo, I take away a turn of Dominate. So later game, Sleep Dart is massive for me being able to like live an extra turn because the turn that you just set up, especially if somebody showtimes and they show me a Crippling Crush, I'm like, no. Here comes 11 Sleep Dart because I know you need your hand to pay for that Crippling Crush. So now you're probably still going to throw it at me for 11, but you're going to have to eat this damage in order to throw it at me for 11, and then I'll just dump my hand to block it and not take the crush effect, and I'll just try to protect myself. Because not having dominate means I don't eat 11. It means I can protect myself going into that turn.
Yep.
So like Sleep Dart is a card that sometimes I like. Early on I liked it so much I would just try to throw it whenever I could because I liked it. And now I've learned like time the situation and make sure you're saving it for the moment that you actually need to turn somebody off as far as their effects go. One of the cards that I love in this deck is Enlightened Strike, because Enlightened Strike is another opportunity to do something like a Ravenous Rabble. I can just bottom a card and give it go again, and it lets me then fire an arrow. If I have a full hand and I have an arrow in arsenal, I have once or twice Enlightened Strike, bottom a card into Ravenous Rabble into Endless Arrow, and you basically just go 5 go again, 4 go again, 4 if it hits I take it back to hand and I just put it right back in my arsenal. And that's where like I'll pair like those turns where I go big, and people will start to kind of prep for that mentally, and then I'll just go wide. I'll go 5 4 4, and none of them will have effects, but basically it's just like every one of these is going to ping a damage or two if you're willing to block one card from hand and not two. And I think that's just, it's really good. It's helpful in the deck.
I think Enlightened Strike, and there's been a lot of discussion about the overrated, not overrated, and it comes down to deck specifics. In your deck, you're paying 1 for a 5 or go again because your pitch values are going to be a 1.
Yep.
Or you playing 1 for a 7. So looking at it like that, that's a good value in your deck. In other decks, you're going to be paying 3, 2, then it's not, the value's not there. Definitely value added in Ranger. In your Ranger, at least.
Yeah. And like even things like Nimbleism, right? Like if I'm like, you know what? I've got a Nimbleism. I got nothing to do with it. I've got 3 cards, right? I got a Nimbleism, I got an Enlightened Strike, and I got something that I don't want to use. I'll just Nimbleism, Enlightened Strike, bottom it. Here's 10. And
10 to your face.
It's just here's 10. It's like, is it dominate? No, it's just 10. Like it's just 10. It's just 25% of your health. Just take it. It's no big deal. Headshot is a card that I really like because it's a blue pitch value. So when it comes up as a pitch value, it allows me to have turns where I'm able to do something like come to fight. I'm able to fire an arrow, and I'm able to still Razor Reflex on the back end. So it triggers a lot as far as that goes, but also it's actually a really good card to pop off of her ability because it goes in face up, which gives it +2, making it a 4 for 1, which is, 4 or 5 for 1 cost is what I'm trying to get out of my attack actions. I will almost never use Headshot as a arrow that I put into my arsenal and then fire out of my arsenal. Most of the time it comes off the top of the deck because I don't love it. I'll never use it as like an arsenal card unless I'm 100% sure I think I can cycle it out, because firing off a 1 cost for 2 is really bad in this deck. It's not what it's meant to do. Knock the Death Whistle is just really good because it sets up those turns where sometimes like I have a Knock the Death Whistle and a Headshot. That's the only time I'll arsenal Headshot face down, is because I'll opt and then I can Knock the Death Whistle and do all the little Knock the Death Whistle shenanigans.
Yeah, and have you... So I was always a big fan of Headshot as a red, and that's something you do not run. Is it because the 6 effect isn't good enough? You like the other effects of the other cards?
Yeah, so the fact that I have to put it in face up to trigger stuff is the thing that creates a little bit of an issue, because it's basically then it's still off the top, but it's one of the few cards that I don't mind running a blue of because it can be a 4 for 1. Right. And the fact that like I had to find some blues, and it's one of the blues that can be a 4 for 1 cost, whereas like all of the other blue stuff is like a 2 for 1 cost, and that just feels terrible in this deck because I'm not trying to ever throw 2 at you under any circumstances. The last card in the deck, I run 2 Feign Death. When I first saw this card, I was really excited, and then I've like gotten progressively more disappointed in it because it's probably only good in playing it into Ninja. Like into Ninja, Feign Death feels great because when Ninja goes like 1/1, 2 or 1/1, 2 8, just kind of out of nowhere throws that like 6 or 8
The
at
huge
you.
combo. The huge
Yeah,
combo.
like that finishing combo, and I don't have a way. I've taken one, right? And this the trigger, and that's the issue is I would actually, if they had made Feign Death a 2 cost just to prevent damage, like one instance, it just prevents an instance of damage. I think it would have been, I don't think it would have been broken because it's still just one card. It's not a cycle. It has no block value, and I have to have the cards to pitch for it. But it would have made it so much more playable, and it would have given Ranger just an opportunity to have a turn where I don't have in Ranger like a real opportunity to just blank one of your turns, which is why I play Tall Ranger and Aggro Ranger, because I don't have block value on my equipment. I don't have great block value on a lot of my cards. So I'm forced into playing a more aggro strategy where I'm trying to burn you down fast and beat you before the war of attrition takes me out. So if Feign Death had just been like pitch 2 to just like stop the next instance of damage you would be dealt. Basically the same card, except I wouldn't have to have the condition of taking damage first, because like into Brute or into like Guardian, it's just such a trash card because I'm almost never going to take 2 instances of damage in a turn.
Nope.
So it's just not even worth putting in the deck. And that also hurts a little bit because it's always sided out. It's never sided into matchups, so it's just a yellow that I could have had that I just don't have anyway. So it counts in my yellow count when you build the deck, but it never makes the cut into matchups. So my yellow count's actually too lower than it appears to be on the deck build. So
your average cost is actually less.
It's actually less. Yeah, my average
So
cost
is
a tick lower.
Tick lower. So going forward, because this is close, and we've discussed that equipment is going to be huge. They need to do something Ranger equipment. They need to give it that extra 2-3 block somewhere in the equipment. Is there any other cards, just thinking of what else could help push this over the top to be a meta deck?
Yeah, I think Ranger is one of those decks that really needs a little more block value. Some cards that have pitch, it's a little more balanced in terms of like its damage output while still blocking for 3, or just maybe some Ranger specific things like Razor Reflex. Things that you can kind of pop on the back end that are more Ranger specific that maybe have triggers, because right now the triggers in Ranger are kind of what make Ranger Ranger. The things that happen as a response to dealing damage. And it would be great if some of these cheap arrows that maybe just have go again, or the cheap arrows that like headshot don't really have an effect. It would be cool to have a Razor Reflex style card that can kind of almost like a Warrior Reprise that triggers an effect after the effect. So now I can pitch one, add +3, and now if it hits, it does something like forces your opponent's next card, or this like pay 1, it's a +2, but your opponent now can no longer trigger defense reactions for the remainder of the chain link, because it would be a responsive thing that would force your opponent to do things that normally they wouldn't do. It gives the deck a little bit more hidden ability to kind of pop up on you out of nowhere, versus now in order to deal a lot of damage, I have to kind of telegraph what I'm doing. Like, here's 11. Are you going to take it or not? If there was a card that just said reaction, like you can't play defense reactions for the rest of the chain link, it would help a lot, because it would kind of force people to kind of play a little out of character against Ranger versus being so calculated.
So just some interesting facts, and this is something that you can do on FabDB that I do and look at, and Blake has obviously explained what he looks at on some things, but there's some metrics in this that can help a lot. So the first metric I'm going to bring up, I'm going to compare 3 decks to, just to give you some extremes. Your deck defensive average block is a 2.7. And that is with running 6/4 blocks. So that shows you how low the Ranger typical blocks are, that it's pulling it down under 3 when you're running 6/4s. In hindsight, my Kano is at the exact 2.7 with 0 4 blocks. So that shows you how much more consistent the 3 block is. Now we go to the other extreme, which is I'll take the top 4 Bravo was a 3.3 block. And you might think those numbers are tiny, but when you're playing your top meta decks, and you need to block 6 to make sure that a counter doesn't get applied or you don't take damage, and you're only blocking 5, it's a huge difference. And when you overblock, so if you overblock because you're expecting the pummel, you're expecting the razor reflex, and now you're overblocking to 7 and you're not overblocking to 9, huge difference. So that's why I agree 100% with this
Mm-hmm.
is what Ranger needs to get that average defensive block closer to the 3, especially with running 4 or 6 4 block defense reactions.
Yeah, I think the other thing, and we talked about this a little bit, right? Like, what are your wishes for the future? We talked about a little in the podcast. I would love a way for Ranger to have, even if it's like a weapon that has some sort of attrition. It can only do it 2 or 3 times in an entire game. I would love a weapon that would be able to do some sort of like close combat thing. I know Ranger is firing arrows and stuff like that, but like a melee, right? Like, you ever watch Legolas, right? Like my favorite archer in all of the world has always been Legolas from Lord of the Rings. And you know, sometimes you get in that close combat, you got to whack somebody with your bow. You know, you just need to pop them in the head. And I just wish that there was a way, because there are turns where that's part of the reason Enlightened Light and Strike and Ravenous Rabble are in the deck, is because sometimes I just miss an arrow. And if I miss an arrow, that's it. My turn is over. Like, I don't have a turn, which is really unfortunate that I'm kind of like pinned down to that one thing that I don't have a weapon that I can just swing. Because like Guardian and Brute and Dorinthia and all these, like, at the end of the day, if you just have one card in hand, you just go, cool, pitch this one card, I'll swing my weapon. And it's not a lot, but if you're forcing your opponent to just block one card, you're still, if they don't have an arsenal card, you're turning their 4-card hand into 3, and that does affect their turn, and it does affect how your next turn goes.
Yeah, I will say I remember playing Dane, and he was playing he might have been playing Runeblade, to be honest with you. And I was setting up for a big block, and it was early Ranger where we didn't have a lot of the stuff, no Crucible, it was hard to reload. And he just decided to make Rune Chance and didn't swing in me and stuck me with a card that I couldn't get out of my arsenal because it was a defense reaction. And so it was like, oh, you son of a bitch. Either you're looking at, how did you do that? And he didn't just swing. And he was like, and then he knows that I have no card and there's no way of getting it out. He's like, huh, maybe I'll just make some more Rune Chance on my next turn. I don't need to swing at you one more time. So I'm glad Crucible and some of the new tools eliminate that from happening. But when you don't have all the good cards at the beginning and you didn't have Crucible with some extra reloads, yeah, that sucked that it had to be an arrow. You're just screwed. Nobody else has that issue. They have a club, they have something they can swing if they have a resource.
Yeah.
But I had a full hand and couldn't do anything.
Yep. And that's part of the reason, like I said, that's part of the reason that I run in Light Strike and Ravenous Rabble, is because sometimes you just draw into a hand and you don't draw an arrow. As high as the math is that you should have an arrow in every hand,
It can happen.
It can happen. And sometimes like the math just requires that you block with an arrow, and it's the only arrow in your hand. And if that happens, you're just stuck. Like, you lose turns. And it's unfortunate that she's like the only hero that kind of gets trapped into that I can't use my weapon thing. Obviously Wizard is like that, but Wizard is unique in the fact that like I can't like shoot an arrow at somebody on defense, which, hey, I mean, you watch archers, man. Like, archers they're wily little dudes. Like it, right? You cast a spell, I should be able to roll out of the way and just like counter shoot an arrow at you. Like, give me that in the next set, right? Like some defense reaction arrows that say like defense reaction, pitch one, shoot an arrow out of your arsenal.
They're the distant archers where you can crank it up to hit them while they're way out there. Yeah. Why that? See, like that stuff's fun. That I think that'll come. Things like that, the little things. I just, my biggest goal is one. I love playing Azalea as well. I'll throw it together. It's fun deck to play. I want good players and good builders to make as many classes as possible meta relevant.
Yep.
And I think that's probably the goal of LSS. I know that's their goal. They want that goal. They don't want to make worthless decks. So that's what we're all hoping for, is that it comes in and we're like, this is insane. Now everything suddenly is a scary matchup. Like that right now, everybody has their deck, and you look at your matchups, and you're like, that's a good matchup, that's a bad matchup. You can you can lose your good matchups, you can win your bad matchups, but you're going to have those. But it's awesome when you go into a meta where it's you have a ton of 50-50 matchups, which then
Mm-hmm.
you feel even better as a good player winning those matchups.
Yep.
That's where the reps comes in.
Yep. Yeah, I'm excited. I like this Azalea build a lot. If anybody has questions, kind of what we say on everything, which is, throw questions in the comments, shoot me a message. I'm happy to talk Ranger. I'm my baby deck is always going to be Warrior, because I think, again, to Jason's point, I do want to be competitive. I want to play good decks. So Warrior right now is definitely competitive more so than Azalea, but that's why I play so much Azaleas, because I'm trying to continue to grind it out and learn this deck better and better, because I want it to be good, and I think it has the potential, and I think it's really close. So if you're a Ranger player and you have questions, feel free to message me and talk to me in the comments. Shoot me a private message. I'm cool with that too. If you have any suggestions, things that you do in your Ranger build, I'm totally open. I'm not locked in on this one strategy. This is the strategy I play. So I would love to hear other Ranger builds and why you run the things you do. If you haven't already, we'd love a like and subscribe. We appreciate that. If you're a newer player and you're just looking for answers to questions, we have a Discord server. We try to answer questions in there. We'll link all of that in the show notes, or down at the bottom in the description, and we go live every Tuesday on our YouTube channel. We play games there. We did webcam this last week. We do TTS a lot, and we're going to continue to put out deck profiles and things, because we want to continue to grow this new player base and hopefully pump out as much information as we can. So thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for always checking out our stuff, and thank you for following us. We appreciate it.
We appreciate it. I'm going to throw this one thing out. We're going to put pressure on. Dane will have you a Viscerai deck in the upcoming weeks. A deck tech of Viscerai. We'll see you very soon.
Very soon. See ya.